Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for standing by and welcome to today's webinar. We are focusing today on this is the second episode of our Sharing Promising Practices focused on collaboration. My name is Sarah Shasia. I'm a project coordinator at OCASI, that's the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, and I'm your facilitator today. So before we begin, I'd like to review a few technical details with you to ensure that we make the most out of your participation today. And you should see something, you should first of all be hearing me now. If you can't hear me, I should be getting some text messages. Everyone is muted, and that's just at the beginning of this webinar and throughout the presentation. Okay, I'm getting one message that says they can't hear me. Can others hear me? Okay, I'm getting one confirmation that I can be heard. Can I get perhaps another confirmation through the chat? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. Yes, so you should see something like this on your control panel. This is the basic control for this webinar, and there are two ways to really participate. When you want to say something during the question and answer period at the end of our presentations, you can use this hand icon over here to let me know that you would like to be unmuted to ask your question directly to the presenters, or you can type your question here. That will also be one way to participate. When you type your question, please type it in a way that's concise. I will read it out loud for the presenters, and they will decide among themselves who will answer it. And it will allow us to have a good discussion. And of course, you are free to, because this is a webinar part focusing on sharing practices, you can also share comments in this way. If it's not a question, but you want to highlight an example from your community, we'd be happy to have that as well. The other item is that please let's try to stay on topic. We do have only an hour, and for that we always ask to ask questions that are on the topic, and that you refrain from identifying particular refugees. If you're sharing a case example, please do not share names or other identifying pieces of information about that person or the family. Also, please note that we're recording today's webinar, and I'll be posting it online on welcomeontario.ca. All of the previous webinars have been posted there as well, and the presentation slides will be there as well. The link to that will be shared with you in a follow-up email. It is also here on this slide. You can see one link. Please ignore the first one because this is our last webinar today, so we don't have any upcoming webinars scheduled to date. But previous webinars, like I said, the recordings and the presentation slides can be found at welcomeontario.ca/page/past webinars. So most of you have, I think, joined previous webinars. This is part of, just for context, part of OCASI's Refugee Settlement Support Project. We had a webinar series called Sharing Practices to Build Bridges, and we focused in this webinar series on identifying or clarifying roles and responsibilities, increasing transparency, all in for the overall goal of strengthening collaboration between refugee sponsorship groups and service providers. So today's webinar is unfortunately our last one, but fortunately a very interesting one. We have Dawn Smith from the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa with us today, as well as Louisa Taylor, Director of Refugee 613 in Ottawa. They will be sharing their experience of working in partnership and building partnerships and teamwork and collaboration within the Ottawa community. So without further ado, I am going to hand over the presentation to Dawn.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
I hope that's brought up the okay. I hope that's brought up the first slide. Is that correct? Can everybody see or can you see the
Yes.
Actually, that's the second slide. This is the first slide? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you could all join us today. As Sarah said, I'm Don Smith. I'm with the Anglican Diocese, but in full disclosure, I'm also on the Refugee 613 Executive Committee, and Louisa Taylor is the Director of Refugee 613. And today we're going to be talking about some of the practices that Refugee 613 developed here in Ottawa to respond to to start responding to the Syrian crisis and going from there. The outline of the talk, we'll go back just a little bit before 2015 when there was an organization in Ottawa. There is an organization in Ottawa called the Coalition Ottawa for Refugees, and how Refugee 613 came about in 2015. What do we do? What does Refugee 613 do? What has been working? What has been challenging? What lessons we've learned? And much of that sort of focuses on the past couple of years, but then there's what's coming to the new normal, what's coming to us as we speak. And then hopefully there'll be time for questions and feedback from everyone. The Coalition in Ottawa for Refugees, or everybody knows it as CORE, started out after Project 4000 was the Ottawa Mayor Marion Doer's response to the boat people crisis, the Southeast Asian refugee resettlement in 1979, 1980. There was a major effort in the city back then, a very major effort. But after after 1980, some of the sponsors, some of the people who had been involved said, we got to stick together and we've got to continue because refugees they're not going away. So some of the people who were originally involved in the Project 4000 came together and created the coalition. And basically the coalitions served to be an advocacy group to promote sponsorship, to help educate sponsors and the public on refugee issues, to provide mutual help, support through the community. We also ended up being involved with numerous refugee claimants as a way to help them get settled. And basically, it was an environment. It was a means for people who are interested in refugees to share their experiences and to support each other. Over the years, CORE came to include most of the sponsors in the city, a number of the advocacy agencies like Citizens for Public Justice and the University of Ottawa Refugee Hub, and the major service providers, particularly the Catholic Center for Immigrants and OCISO and Jewish Family Services, wherever they are, here they are, okay? However, CORE was always a very informal agency. It was a group of people that came together because of shared interest, but didn't have a structure per se, or any sort of incorporation. One of the advocacy issues, or one of the advocacy activities that we got into, and bringing us up to date, took place on World Refugee Day in 2014, and CORE organized a rally. We were calling it Reignite Project 4000, rekindle the spirit of Project 4000, and let's open our doors to Syrian refugees. And the output of that rally was a petition, and the petition was to increase the resettlement quota for Syrian refugees to 10,000 under an accelerated program. Can you imagine that? 10,000 back in the summer of 2014 was an amazing number. Of course, the motto here is be careful what you wish for, because you might actually get it. But then nothing happened for the entire year, through the fall of 2014, through the spring of 2015, summer of 2015. Nothing happened, of course, until the photo of Alan Kurdi was published, and collectively, I'm sure, all our worlds changed. The media attention that was given to Alan Kurdi's death, it captured the public's attention, and it galvanized the politicians at the federal, provincial, and municipal level. And at the municipal level, CORE was called into a meeting with Mayor Watson September 15th, 2015. And at that time, I remember we knew something was happening. We didn't know how to get our arms around it. We knew that we had to do something to maintain the momentum that we were from the publicity that Alan Kurdi's death had created. There were a number of tactical issues that we brought up with the mayor: the issue of liability for sponsorship agreement holders, the fact that we were getting calls left, right, and center, and we needed some way of handling all those requests. I can remember saying the city must have a warehouse somewhere because we were getting inundated with offers of furniture and stuff. We knew there would be a problem with housing. We knew that the existing sponsors couldn't handle the massive number of sponsorship applications we were starting to see, and we needed a better way than CORE to coordinate all the stakeholders across the city. And with that, I'll turn it over to Louisa to pick up with Refugee 613. Louisa, are you there?
I am. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Oh,
I'm just going to mute my. I can hear you. You're good. You're good. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sarah, for having us. We love talking about the work that we do and the collaboration. So as Dawn said, there'd been a strong community support for refugee sponsorship in Ottawa in the years leading up to 2015, and like many other actors, trying to get traction on supporting the Syrians. And in general, the refugee resettlement landscape looked a bit like this. Lots of players, not necessarily super closely connected. Sometimes there were some close connections between individuals or between some organizations. Some people were connected through CORE, but other people weren't there, other actors weren't there. And so the goal was to, so what happened was at the same time that people in CORE were going to see the mayor and talking about how to improve, how Ottawa could respond to the Syrians, other actors were having the same conversations. And in particular, I was part of a group that included settlement leaders, health leaders, and others who wanted to see Ottawa do a better job of resettling the Syrians. So we started to talk to each other very rapidly after the public showed huge interest after Alan Kurdi's death. And Dawn, if we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, Dawn. Thank you. So we very quickly started to we reached out to CORE and pulled everybody in to the same conversation and talked about how can we do a better job together. And the idea was that we had a fairly robust settlement infrastructure in Ottawa already. We had a strong sponsorship structure already, but we did not have strong linkages between the two. And plus, the biggest overall factor was that nobody was ready for the kind of demand that was being put on every single actor in the space in the fall of 2015. And we all felt like there was a moment to grasp here that that really we could do a better job if we worked together and if we were communicating more. And so that's really where we ended up very quickly, was that it was the communication part of collaboration and sponsorship that we really wanted to focus on, because a lot of actors felt that we had the other aspects in place. And the biggest communication challenge really was with communicating out to the public and also communicating between different players. So within, I would say, within 3 weeks of Alan Kurdi's death, we had come up with a model, which is the Refugee 613 model, which we'll talk about some more later. We had branding, we had a name, we had branding, and we had a website, and we launched on October 1st. After we had developed our model, we had been talking to City Hall and the mayor's office while we were organizing, and so we were in touch with them, and we knew that they weren't going to create any special office for this response. So it really was very much a grassroots response, with the City Hall as major partners for us, but it was really led by people like the members of CORE, leaders of settlement agencies, leaders of health, faith groups, volunteers who've been working with refugees, and so on. And so next, so the core, sorry about the pun, the main goal of Refugee 613 is to connect people. And we do that through individual one-on-one connection. We do that through group connection. We do it through sharing information. We like to say that the Syrians brought us together, but we've always been here for all refugees. Although it is 100% true that in the early days, all our work was dominated by the arrival of the Syrians, as I'm sure many of you can attest. The other thing that we like to make clear to people is that we don't provide frontline services, but we support the people who do. So in the early days, we used some messaging that included the word coordination. That was because we really had a desire to clarify things so that people weren't duplicating efforts, etc. We pretty quickly stopped using that word because it implied that we had some kind of authority and could tell anybody what to do, which we could not. All we had was moral authority. But we had plenty of moral authority because just about every actor in town had invested in the creation of Refugee 613 and wanted to come to our spaces to talk about who was doing what and sort of self-coordinate. So we were convening spaces, but we were not dictating who did what or what kind of services were being provided. Next slide, please, Dawn. Thank you. And so how have we done this? Well, our three main pillars are to inform, connect, and inspire. And I'll just actually take a step back and explain. Dawn and I were in the founding consultations, and pretty quickly we came up with a stakeholder group of about, well, it varies, but between, I'd say, 25 to 30 people representing all different kinds of stakeholders in the community. But primarily settlement and sponsorship are the two biggest players. And from that stakeholder committee, we have an executive committee, and we are hosted by the settlement agency OCISO. So OCISO provides our HR and finance and governance structure, but we operate independently. My staff and I report to the executive committee and ultimately to the stakeholder table. And so inform, connect, and inspire are our three sort of pillars of work. And we inform in many, many ways. And inform and connect often overlap, but essentially we're almost like an information distribution hub. We're helping the general public understand how they can be involved. It's both passive and active. People can send us their inquiries. We will get them answers. We will go on in local media to answer questions. When we see an issue that needs clarification, sometimes we'll reach out. Mostly it's been passive. We've had requests for us to speak. We maintain a social media presence because we know that by being in the social media space, we can provide content to help our allies and refugee allies keep refugee issues front and center. And a big part of our Inform activities is the planning and logistics and promotion of training workshops, primarily around sponsorship. So we collaborated with CORE. That was one of our earliest successes. All the subject experts in CORE, like Dawn and other members of sponsorship agreement holders and very experienced constituents groups, they had so much expertise to share, and they had been holding sponsorship workshops in the past. But again, the volume of inquiries was so high that our team was able to provide all kinds of logistics to really leverage their knowledge and get the space, manage the catering, do the promotion, prepare the materials, all of that kind of thing, and then do heavy promotion in order to create these workshops. And we continue to do that to this day. In fact, we're working with RSTP and our partners from CORE to see if we can improve the workshop curriculum to address some of the things that we're seeing in sponsorship experience. Next one, please, Dawn. So the connection part of what we do is creating the space. So that's convening working groups. And that's kind of something that evolves according to emerging needs. But right now, we have sort of two main working groups, one on housing and one is on private sponsorship. And in those working groups, it's mostly frontline workers coming together and sharing their concerns. And sometimes they'll create a collaborative initiative out of it. Sometimes they will flag things that they want Refugee 613 to speak on. We've done some advocacy to politicians on certain issues. So those working groups are really just for people to have the space to talk and to learn. And what it also does is it gives us, on the staff of Refugee 613, a direct pipeline of information for what's happening on the ground, so that when we are asked to speak, we speak with some understanding and knowledge. And whenever someone wants to speak to an expert, we always put them in touch with our partners. We do that a lot. We're often arranging media interviews or presentations by our sponsors because we're not the experts. But when there's somebody asking a general question about refugees and refugee issues in Ottawa, it's really important for us to stay informed. We also connect people using the content on our website or by answering inquiries so that people can understand, where they can, if they want to sponsor. Our website tries to give them basic information so that they're not calling all the saws with questions right away. And we host workshops, as I mentioned. And we have our motto there. If we don't have the answer, we'll stay on it until we do. Because often we find that our partners in settlement and also our partners in sponsorship are simply, it's too much to ask them to answer every public inquiry. There are some really basic questions that people ask. And yet we want to make sure that the public knows there are pathways to help and there are places to get your answer. So we will take the time to talk to somebody for 45 minutes about their problem, whether it's getting in.
Louisa, Louisa, I think we've lost your
sponsorship, whether it's relating to finding the right setup.
Hello?
Next slide.
Louisa, we lost audio with you there for a couple of seconds.
Thank you. So our third pillar is less relevant here, but we do some messaging and communication about refugees, and we're calling that Inspire. And our stakeholders have asked us, now that the Syrian refugee influx has slowed down, to do more advocacy. There was a lot of fear around doing advocacy in the beginning because when we started, we were still under the Harper government. That has done a complete 180. Our partners really want us to do advocacy now, but we're not yet funded or structured to do it in a systematic way, but we do a little bit of it. And the goal is really, a lot of us were motivated with this effort. We felt that there was a moment to seize where we could create something that could have lasting impact for refugees beyond the immediate crisis or emergency, I should say, of responding to.
Hello? I think we've lost Louisa's audio again. Louisa, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me, Louisa?
I can. You can't hear me?
We lost you there for a couple of...
I can hear you.
We had lost you for a couple of seconds, and I think there's an audio delay. Can you repeat your last point? Now I don't hear anything. Louisa, if you're there, could you just repeat your last point?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, but we lost you in between for a few seconds. I'm wondering if you could just...
Okay, to make up time, we can... Sure, it was just about this slide about Inspire, which is really about advocacy and the importance of having someone who can do that advocacy, because so many players are either not funded for it or just don't have the capacity to do it. We can move on to the next slide. So what made it hard to create Refugee 613? Well, what's interesting here is the things that made it hard are the same reasons that we were doing it in the first place, is that there were lots of silos and a lack of trust between just about every player. Yes, there were some very strong relationships that were really important, but there weren't enough of them. And it was great because in the creation of Refugee 613, and I should really say in responding to the Syrians, relationships that had either been tense or non-existent really flourished. Sometimes I have intense environment there because sometimes the meetings were not fun. Sometimes there were some very clashing perspectives, and people really wanted had a different idea about what was most important, what priorities should be. There was some, I call it a hangover of some times when the settlement sponsorship relationship had not been so successful or robust, and people still carried feelings about that. And this was an opportunity to work through those things. So it made it hard, but it also was really why we were all there. Another challenge is the competition for funding, primarily within the settlement sector. That's the big issue. But a higher degree of collaboration. Ottawa's been a pretty collaborative place, and I think it's even more so now, but we still face that challenge. And new players, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, especially from the service provider side, that, you know, all kinds of volunteer groups were springing up and people wanted to help. And it was great to have that energy, but it could also be counterproductive. And that was true sometimes of sponsors. We had some sponsorship super groups develop, and they had very fixed, firm ideas about how things should be done. So there was a process to educate those folks, and that's where Refugee 613 came in. Sometimes we would just quietly go to a group that we knew that was causing challenges for other players, and we would work to educate them about the settlement perspective, the role of settlement, the role of a SAW, et cetera, depending on what the issue was. And we found that that really helped to ensure that their energy stayed in the effort, but was more productive and helpful in general. Next slide, please. So what made it possible to create Refugee 613? I think that the main thing is that every single door in our city and beyond was open to helping refugees at that moment in 2015. So there already was a huge level of mobilization across the community, and Refugee 613 was a way to capitalize on that, to maximize it and give it some direction. So the collaborative spirit was very, very high, and everyone saw that we had a lot of assets as a community, and that we wanted to make sure that we did the best with those assets. I remember some local politicians saying to me, I just don't want to see everyone running around in different directions. I want to see some coordination. And so, although, as I said at the beginning, we weren't telling people what to do, we were able to tell people, no, someone is already doing what you would like to do, and why don't we connect you with them, and you can collaborate, and then you'll be stronger. Having media attention was also very helpful in creating Refugee 613, because it got the word out right away. As a result of those efforts in 2015, more than 6,500 people signed up to our mailing list to know more about what's happening in the community. And since then, we've probably lost about 1,000 to 1,200 of those people, but I'm still amazed that they're still on our list, and it's something that we are able to use. We use it. We don't overuse it. We can actually use it more, but it means that everybody knew and about what was happening, and knew that Ottawa was responding. And again, we were able to seize the moment because of the interest, and build something that was filling existing gaps, and could help us all out. Next slide, please. So some of the things we've learned is that our model, we haven't yet found a community that has approached the resettlement of refugees, or welcome of refugees, I should say, because we're not just about resettled refugees, in quite the way we have, with the model that is highlighting communication and collaboration. But we know that is because it doesn't fit every community. I think the important thing is to know that flow of information is really important, and knowledge elevates everyone's efforts. So whatever model you need to in your community, that works in your community, so that people are tied into each other and talking and actually sitting down at a table and working together on a regular basis, creating personal relationships that can sustain you, and people know where to go when they have a problem, where to go when they need a service. That makes a huge difference. We've focused, for the purposes of this webinar, on settlement and sponsorship as partners, but we've really learned that that's just the beginning. Those are two fundamental, essential partners, but you really need to loop in other partners as much as you can as well, because refugees are seen by so many different actors in the community. They call on so many services, and those folks are, often will feel left out. They may be serving refugee clients on a regular basis, but they're not tapping into the same information networks and understanding the client needs as much as settlement and sponsorship. And if you have a mechanism to bring those folks in, again, you're kind of providing more wraparound support to the refugees. And finally, I'll just, before passing off to Dawn, say, we started as a temporary project. We thought we would probably work for a couple of years and then maybe spin off some of our projects, our services to other agencies, and fold up shop and be proud of what we'd achieved. But we realize now that this is the new normal. We're going to have higher levels of refugees coming, and in fact, the demand for our services has only increased with every passing year. It has not decreased, and especially with the influx of claimants last year. So I'm going to let Dawn take over now and speak to the what we mean by the new normal.
Thank you, Louisa. I guess I'm online. This graph shows the number of refugees that Canada has resettled going way back to 1979. Going way back to 1979. And the Vietnamese, or the Southeast Asian boat people, there was this huge peak in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. But the point here is that as we get into the period that we're in now, the numbers are going up again. From 1994 to 2014, this period where most of our settlement agencies, most of our sponsors sort of cut their teeth, Canada landed 153,887 GARs, 76,861 privately sponsored refugees. The GAR to PSR ratio was 2 to 1. Every year, the government landed about 7,500 GARs. Gradually, the number of PSRs increased, but always the average landing rate during the two-decade period was about 11,000 a year. Starting with 2015, basically starting with the current government, and taking it out to 2020, the end of the multi-year levels plan, Canada's going to land 67,691 GARs and 110,104 PSRs and BVRs. That means that the ratio of privately sponsored to GARs has been turned over from more GARs than PSRs to now, in this 5-year period, more PSRs than GARs. This is the new normal. That the government is now, the minister, cabinet, because it's cabinet mandates the levels, that they have now decided that civil society is expected to support these record high levels of resettlement, and we mean record high, particularly in the 2 decades after the end of the Cold War. We're landing 3 times as many refugees as we did during those 2 decades. And cabinet, the government, has decided that it's going to be civil society that's going to support those high levels of resettlement through the private sponsorship of refugees program. What that means is that we need improved connections, significantly improved connections between service providers who, although have always provided services to privately sponsored refugees, have seen I believe, I could say honestly, that they've seen their major clientele as being government-assisted refugees. We need much better connection between the service providers and the sponsors. What we'd like to suggest is that service providers now have to see PSRs and BVRs as their clients just as much as they've seen GARs over the past 2 decades. there's significant room to improve the partnerships between service providers and sponsors. However, most privately sponsored refugees are family-linked cases, and that's going to require new ways of thinking how services are delivered to them, how to connect with the family members. And that's where the whole ethos of Refugee 613 and organizations and other places like that, the whole notion of connecting people is going to be critical in ways that were different than they were during the during Operation Syrian Refugees, but not just no less important, but even significantly more important, because the numbers are greater than ever. So what I'm going to leave you with, that the goal is an informed community to welcome, a connected community, and it's more important now than it ever has been. We can't afford, given the huge number of refugees we're bringing in during this last 5-year period, we can't afford to fail. There's just too many. We have to succeed. And by informing, by connecting, we can do it. At this point, I think we turn it back over to Sarah for questions.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, thank you, Don. Thank you, Louisa. That was very informative and very interesting. I liked hearing about the roots and how it came about, Refugee 613. We still have a good amount of time for questions, so we can take the questions by in written format. If you prefer to type up your questions and send them to me, I can read it out loud for Don and Louisa. Or if you would like to ask your questions directly, you can raise your hand. So I can see that Moses has his hand up, so I'll just unmute you, Moses. And if your audio works, you should be able to ask your question now. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey Sarah.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks to you and to the presenters and for the awesome work that is happening in 613.
Moses, can you speak more directly into the microphone you're using? It's very quiet. Or closer to the laptop if you're using a built-in microphone. Hello? And now we can't hear you at all. Okay, Moses has decided to type his question. So while we wait for Moses to type his question, I will read you out a question from Brian Joel. Brian is saying on one of the slides, Louisa has indicated that settlement and sponsorship are just the beginning. The question is, could Louisa elaborate on the statement? Who might be the other key players?
Excellent question. Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that question. The other players really depend on your community and your community size in particular. But what we've found is that the players that have made a difference that we have made sure as much as possible are at the table would be the medical community. I would say health/medical. In particular, the community health centers. We have a number of them here in Ottawa. We did not loop them in sufficiently in the early days. We had some CHCs at the table taking a very strong leadership role. But what we didn't know is that other CHCs were completely out of the loop and were receiving a lot of refugees to their neighborhood and could have really benefited from being part of our information pipeline. So we also had hospital representatives because we had a big health task force. We had hospital representatives and all other kinds of players in the medical community. Education was important. We started out having an education working group And in the end, that was only, I think, one meeting, and we have 4 school boards here in Ottawa, and they indicated pretty quickly that they didn't need a working group, but they wanted to be able to send some of their staff to our other tables, which they did, and they continue to be very active participants at our main stakeholder table. So it was helpful for them to hear information that they could feed back into their planning on the ground level and their newcomer reception centers. Faith groups were really important because some of them were making a major effort to support the refugees. Volunteers, sort of the free agents who kind of cropped up and started creating response efforts on their own, we found it extremely important to engage with them, especially because some of our partners were completely unable to find the time to talk to these folks, and yet these folks were, some of their efforts were counterproductive to the work that professionals were doing. And so we sort of intervened and tried to give those folks training and information to make them really useful, and also give them a better experience. And they have turned out to be very strong partners in the community. So sort of freelance volunteers, faith groups, City Hall has been extremely important to keep the staff and some of the councillors there informed about developments and emerging issues. I think I could go on. At different times, different actors have been important, such as community recreation groups like sports clubs and the Boys and Girls Club, etc. And you know, one of the great things for our community, I always say that responding to the Syrians in a collaborative way helped Ottawa to become a stronger community. And a lot of people, a lot of players tell us that by sitting at that table and talking to people, they suddenly understood the role that they had to play in refugee response and integration. And it has changed their programming, and it has changed their knowledge of the city, and it has given them new relationships. Some of that may have happened without sort of active connection, but I think it's really important to know that a lot of times those relationships don't happen organically. And so if you can foster them in some way that works in your context, it can be really valuable. And to go beyond the traditional players of settlement and sponsorship who are usually at the table. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Louisa. And a follow-up question from Brian is, are there similar organizations to Refugee 613 in the Greater Toronto Area? Is there a Refugee 416 or a Refugee 905?
I'm going to have to say that I don't know. What we do know, I kept expecting to meet the other Refugee 613 type organizations in other locations, and I haven't yet. What I can say is that in many communities, the Local Immigration Partnership, the LIP, played a similar role. And in Ottawa, the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership has for many years been doing an incredible job of pulling together different partners around the table to improve the attraction and retention of all immigrants. But in the case of the arrival of the Syrians and refugees in general, there was a general feeling by the community that we needed something that was more about rapid response and very much focused on refugees only. And so that's why we created this model. But I do know, I believe in Winnipeg and in Halifax, for sure, that the LIPs played a very active role, very operational role in the refugee response. But over and over, when I'm presenting in different places, talking to people in different communities, I never meet someone else who's done it in the way that we did it. And that doesn't mean anything great about us. It just means that people find what works for them. But I have no idea if there's something similar in Toronto. In the early days, people thought of us as being like Lifeline Syria, but our model's completely different, because Lifeline Syria is actually facilitating sponsorships, whereas my team, we don't do any sponsorship facilitation at all. We leave that to Dawn and the members of CORE and the settlement agencies who are doing sponsorship. But we do answer sponsors' questions, help them connect to services, and provide training and information. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't tell you about another model that's similar to ours. I would really love to hear about them. If anybody knows about them, you can send us an email at info@refugee613.ca, because we always know there are things we could be doing better, and if someone else is doing something, we really want to hear about it.
Thank you. So the question from Moses is first a comment and a question. Thanks to the presenters and for the awesome work that is happening in the 613 area. The question is, how are the SPOs, so the service provider providing organizations, working with the private sponsors to ensure that accurate information is provided to the newcomers based on the different streams that they have arrived through? So I think he's alluding to whether it's a blended visa office referred case or privately sponsored refugee case or otherwise JAS or GAR. So again, just to repeat,
Dawn, would you like to take that?
How are
Okay.
the SPOs working with the private sponsors?
The major, sorry, stepping back. The training that Refugee 613 and RSTP did through the first year emphasized the try to inform sponsors about the service provider organizations, and the service provider, the SPOs are active participants in the Refugee 613 stakeholders committee. How well that's been done, I'm not entirely sure. For sponsored refugees and for BVORs, we've done a survey, and just about everybody who needed, they've all gone into language training. They feed through the Language Assessment Bureau, which is run by the Y, and then they go into the language ESL training that's run by several different agencies across the city. So from the language training perspective, that has been virtually seamless. The other services that the settlement agencies provide, we're not convinced that sponsored refugees and BVORs are drawing the benefits they could, and we're pretty sure that we've got to improve the training that we're doing, or training is the wrong word, the informing, the supporting. The information is available. It's available on the 613 website, but it's also available at the agencies themselves. But I'm not sure that information is getting out there, and that enough sponsors are taking advantage of the services other than ESL training. The point that I was alluding to in the last couple of slides, that as we move into an environment that is dominated by sponsored refugees, in many cases family-linked refugees, the real challenge for all of us is going to be how to connect the family sponsor, how to make sure that the family sponsor is getting all the services for his or her family member that he's sponsoring from the settlement agencies. There is a concern that in some cases, family-linked sponsorships, that newcomers arriving under a family-linked sponsorship can be isolated with their family. And we've got to develop ways of making sure that in those cases, that the family-linked refugee is being exposed to and getting all the benefits that they can from the programs run by the settlement agencies. So I don't think we've got that down. I don't think we've got this one solved yet. I think that's going to be the challenge over the next couple of years. I would like to point out that in those large landing numbers that we saw in the previous slide, or that we see in the multi-year levels plan, those are applications that are already in the system, are with immigration. We know that a lot of those are family link cases, where the only connection that the newcomer will have with Canada will be through the family member that's already here. Some cases that will work very well, but there's the risk that some of those other cases where the newcomer simply arrives at his family's home somewhere in the city and stays there is going to be a real challenge. Okay.
Thank you. Kathy, I saw that you had your hand up. It seems we disappeared, but I'm just going to unmute you. Did you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yes, I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. I have a question for Dawn about the last couple slides. Just a quick one. I'm actually working in Montreal, based at Action Réfugiés Montréal. So I just wanted to confirm that the landing numbers in the last slides with the ratios from PSR and GARS includes Quebec. I'm not sure if I missed that in the presentation.
Hi, Kathy. Yes, those are the national numbers. Those are the numbers that are part of the immigration levels plan, and so they're and those are landing numbers, not application numbers. So those are the refugees that will be landing in 2018, 2019, 2020. The famous numbers are 2018 we land 18,000 across the country. 2018 we land 18,000 refugee newcomers. 2019 we land 19,000. 2020 we land 20,000, and then 16, 1,700 BVORs along with them. 7,500, 8,500, 10,000 GARs. Those are all the numbers out of the immigration levels plan. And
can you go, sorry to interrupt. Can you go back to that slide? Can you pull it up?
Yep, I think.
Sorry about that.
Come on, computer, go back. Why can't I go back?
I think you may have to hit escape to exit and then.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
And slideshow from the current slide. Okay.
Thank you.
Come on. There we go. Okay, and let me minimize this. Right. Okay. This peak here. That is the number of GARs that landed in 2016. This is the number of PSRs that landed in 2016. Here in 2017, we dropped down to, this is 16,700 PSRs, and this is then climbing each year, 18,000, 19,000, and 20,000. Those are right across the country. The drop from about 24,000, I forget the exact number, from 24,000 GARs in 2016 down to 7,500 GARs in 2017, and then it gradually climbs again. But the point is that through the 3-year period of the multi-levels, and here are the BVORs down here, the 3-year period from 2018, 2019, 2020, those are all in the multi-year levels plan. We can have quite a bit of confidence in them because even the multi-year levels plan called for, or the levels plan for 2016 called for 2017, I'm sorry, called for 16,000 PSRs to land. The department actually landed 16,700. So they were exceeding their target level. So all of these in this section here, all of those people are going to land. Their applications are already in the system. They're part of the 41,000 applications that are backlogged in the system. So that is going to happen, regardless of of the freeze in Quebec, regardless of the caps that they're putting on us, they're putting on SAWS for the applications these years. All of those people in this column, in that line there, are already submitted. So we know what they look like. Well, sorry, we don't. We have an idea what they look like. We know there's a lot of family link cases in there, and first, if you're a settlement agency, these are the GARs you're going to have to deal with down here, 75, 85, 10,000. Here are the PSRs. I'm sorry, I'm making a mess of this, but here are the PSRs that you're going to deal with: 16,000, 17,000, 18,000, 19,000, 20,000. That is different than what we saw here. That's totally different. And that's the point. This is where our settlement agencies were structured, developed. That's how we worked historically. Now it's a new ball game. Sorry for messing that up, but that's okay, Kathy?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much for the drawings. It really helps to understand all this. Could I add one comment, Sarah?
Yes, go ahead.
This is a comment that relates to an earlier question about whether the 613 refugees model exists elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
For Montreal, it does not exist in this way. I guess I work at a Quebec SAW, although we are not SAWs, but we are. And I think that what I will be doing with this workshop is sharing the recording to other organizations that do sponsorships in this province and in this city. And hopefully we can use some of these great practices to improve services, because at this time, I think SAWs in Quebec just answer questions because there isn't a structure like 613 here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that comment, Kathy. If I can just, I guess we're going over. If I can just say, if anybody wants to talk to me about how we're doing it or why or anything, just feel free to send us an email, because I think the thing is, people often think that information and connection, again, is just going to happen organically, but you do have to create a structure and make it happen. And sometimes that means you have to find the money to do it, but it makes everybody else's efforts that much more powerful and have more impact.
Thank you, Louisa. We do have an interesting question. I just want to pick up. This would be the last question as we're over time. And I wonder if you could briefly comment. It's from Binyam, who's asking about the challenge that you mentioned earlier, the one about housing. Binyam is asking, is it still a challenge, or were you able to implement a systematic approach to solving it, like getting in touch with city housing agencies? If you could briefly.
I wish I could say we solved it. We have not solved it. It's only getting worse. Someone said to me early in this experience that emergencies shine a light on all the holes in your safety net or the flaws in your system, and it most certainly has put a big spotlight on the lack of affordable housing in Ottawa and other communities. And then the subsequent wave of refugee claimants has done the same. So Ottawa's shelter system, an emergency social housing system, is overburdened. Our city shelters are turning people away, including large families, because we specifically don't have enough space for families. So we have not solved it, which is one of the reasons I think that our housing working group is one of the most dynamic, active groups, because everyone comes together to that space to try to talk about what's happening. We've brought in some city officials to answer questions from frontline workers. So it's become a very, very much a place that people come to brainstorm response in, every couple of months. We housed, and when I say we, I mean the community, because I personally had nothing to do with actually finding people homes, but the RAP agency, volunteers, sponsors, all worked very hard to find housing as soon as possible for the Syrians. but it continues to be a challenge. It's the housing stock is not great. The rents are high. There are bed bug issues. Housing, I believe, is the single biggest challenge related to refugee integration that we've identified, and it's not going to be resolved overnight. So I wish I had a more positive answer for you, but I don't.
Thank you, Louisa. Hopefully, yeah, this is a recurrent issue, so hopefully somehow we'll find a way together to solve these issues. As we're out of time, I'd like to really thank Louisa and thank you, Don. Thank you for everyone who's attended today's webinar and participated in a discussion. Especially if you have any other comments or feedback or questions for Louisa and Don, feel free to email at the address Louisa mentioned before, or at the email address where you can reach me, which I'm just going to pull up quickly over here. We do have a follow-up email that will be sent to you automatically by the system in about, I believe, tomorrow. In there will be this link again where you can access the recording of this webinar, including the slides. And here's also the refugee Settlement.Org email address where you can reach me. We would like to thank you again on behalf of Okasi and Louisa and Don for joining us. And yes, so stay in touch. If you have other examples of collaboration across the country or within Ontario, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you and have a wonderful day.